The sound of the tiger's growl echoed in the empty hospital parking garage, but it wasn't a warning. It was the cry of a mother in despair, her body trembling with an ache that no human could understand. Luma, bruised and broken, lay in her jaws like the last piece of something precious she was unwilling to lose. In that moment the world stood still. The walls of the sterile, cold hospital dissolved, and time bent around the bond between them, a bond that no one could name, but everyone could feel. And as the tiger's wild eyes met those of the doctors and nurses, one question hung in the air. How do you save a child who isn't just hers, but hers in every way that matters? The hospital was eerily calm for a Sunday morning. A mother wept softly in the corner of the waiting room, clutching her purse like it might hold all the answers. A nurse hummed absently, her feet shuffling across the linoleum floor as she updated the chart on her clipboard. Outside, the sun broke through the sky, casting lazy beams of light across the sterile white walls. Everything seemed like a painting frozen in time. Then, the automatic doors slid open, and the world changed. At first, there was only the sound of heavy, purposeful footsteps, the shuffle of claws against smooth floors. Slowly, a figure emerged from the sunlight, enormous and wild, a Bengal tiger, her striped coat glistening like the deepest orange sunset. She moved with a grace that defied her size, but there was something haunting in her eyes, something that spoke of a story far darker than the room could contain. Her mouth was clenched around the body of a small, fragile girl no older than 8. The girl was limp, her body broken in places that no child should be, yet there was still life in her, a breath that caught in her chest, a faint flutter of eyelids. The tiger moved cautiously, her gaze sweeping over the room with wild searching eyes. Her tail twitched once, then twice, and finally settled. The nurse froze. The clipboard fell to the floor. A chair scraped loudly as a man, one of the doctors, Dr. Elena Ramirez, stood up from the nearby counter, eyes wide in disbelief. Time slowed. No one knew what to do. The tiger's eyes met the nurse's, and there was a brief, silent exchange, an understanding that neither could fully articulate. The air was thick with the question that hung between them. What do we do now? Then the tiger gently placed the girl on the floor, as if she were nothing more than a delicate doll, her small limbs splayed out, her face bruised and battered. The tiger's breath was heavy, her chest rising and falling, but she didn't make a sound. Not a growl. Not a snarl. She simply sat down, her massive frame blocking the hallway. Her eyes fixed on the nurses. Dr. Ramirez moved first, her steps measured and calm despite the pounding of her heart. She crouched down beside the child, her fingers brushing against the little girl's wrist. She's alive, Dr. Ramirez whispered, her voice low but urgent. Get her to trauma now. The tiger's ears flicked at the sound of the command, but she didn't move. Instead, she lowered her head, her tail flicking restlessly behind her. She didn't stop the nurses as they wheeled the child away, but she watched. Her eyes locked onto the girl, her gaze unwavering, almost possessive, the moment they disappeared from sight. The tiger rose, her enormous paws moving soundlessly against the floor. She padded after them, stopping just outside the room. And there she remained, silent, patient, as if she knew that the world would bend to her will in time. But for now, there was only waiting. The hospital buzzed with activity, but a tension lingered in the air, one that refused to dissipate. Word of the tiger's arrival spread faster than the nurses or security could manage, each new whisper carrying the weight of something extraordinary. Within hours, Mercy General wasn't just a hospital. It had become the center of a mystery that gripped the nation. A tiger, one nurse muttered, eyes wide as she passed another in the hall. She carried a child in her mouth. Didn't even attack anyone. Just brought her here. A tiger? The second nurse repeated, unable to fully comprehend. It wasn't long before the media descended. They arrived in droves, setting up makeshift tents in the parking lot and planting reporters outside the hospital's entrance. Cameras flashed as the story broke. Tiger rescues girl. But it was the same question on every tongue that held the world's attention. Where had the tiger come from? The press dubbed her the mother tiger. It was fitting. Every frame of her that the world saw, her wild eyes, her quiet dignity, her fierce protectiveness spoke of a primal bond between the beast and the girl she'd carried for miles. To safety, a shadow hung over Loma, though a dark mystery yet to be solved. She didn't speak much, and when she did, her words were as fractured as the bruises on her small body. The girl was barely 8, the medical staff assumed. No one knew where she'd come from, or why she was covered in cuts, bruises, and what looked like the faintest scars of old injuries. Her eyes, though, spoke volumes. They were wide, almost too big for her face, as though they held the weight of a life far too old for someone her age. "Her name's Luma," Dr. Elena Ramirez said, her voice quiet, almost as if she were speaking to herself. She had been the one to check on the child first, her fingers light as they traced the outline of the girl's ribs, noting the tenderness in her body. There was a fracture in her arm, a head injury too. She'd been through more than anyone should. The child's condition was improving slowly. But the real mystery lay in the presence of the tiger, still parked in the hospital's parking garage, her form looming just beneath the fluorescent lights. She hadn't left. She won't. "Leave her?" Nurse Joy said to Dr. Ramirez one evening, her voice tinged with exhaustion. "I tried to coax her into the animal shelter this morning, but she just sat there. Her eyes never left Luma's room. It's like she's waiting for something or someone." Dr. Ramirez paused, her gaze turning toward the window where the tiger sat, her back still as a mountain. The moonlight bathed her orange coat, and the strange stillness in the air almost made it feel like the tiger was waiting for the world to make sense again. The police were no closer to solving the mystery of the girl's identity, but they had discovered something startling. An animal rights officer, trying to piece together information about the tiger, stumbled upon a small but well-hidden detail. A pair of tags attached to the collar of a manila folder found in the hospital storage closet. One tag read, "Sundari, the other. Sundari, the Bengal tiger rescued from poachers in India." Dr. Ramirez took a long breath as she looked at the folder. Her fingers grazed the paper, the weight of what it might imply sinking in. "Do you think she's from a zoo? A sanctuary?" Nurse Joy asked. Ramirez shook her head. "No, this tiger has lived in the wild. She has the markings of someone who's been raised with freedom, not captivity. She's not used to these walls, this place. It's foreign to her." Just then, a series of urgent knocks echoed down the hallway, followed by the unmistakable clatter of hoofbeats, the sound of a larger animal than any of them had ever imagined. Joy opened the door, and a wildlife officer entered, his face drawn tight with worry. "Doc," he began, his voice a mix of respect and disbelief, "you need to see this." Outside, a black van was pulling into the parking lot. The logo on its side was unmistakable. It was from Global Wildlife Rescue, an organization that dealt with the rehabilitation of endangered species. The vehicle was large, built for a creature far larger than a human. "They're here for the tiger," Ramirez said quietly, and they were, at least that's what they claimed. The officer explained that Sundari had been flagged by international wildlife conservation groups. She had been rescued by a woman named Leah Winters, who had dedicated her life to protecting endangered animals. But Leah Winters had gone missing years ago, and Sundari the tiger had been living in the wild ever since. But now Sundari was here. And according to their records, the tiger had been a partner to a woman named Leah Winters, someone who had vanished without a trace years ago, lost to the wilderness that night. While the world outside the hospital buzzed with unanswered questions, the tiger waited, her eyes, golden and luminous, never left the third-floor window where Luma lay sleeping. She didn't move, didn't eat, didn't drink. There was a quiet energy in her that hinted at more than just physical strength. There was a depth of emotion behind those eyes, something that made her more than just an animal. She was family, that much was clear. As the hours passed, a few of the hospital staff stood outside, keeping watch, not knowing what to do or how to approach the situation. Some took pictures, others whispered about what had happened. Some wondered aloud if the tiger had been trained for something special, but that theory was quickly dismissed. No tiger could be so calm unless there was something deeper at play. It wasn't long before they learned a new detail, an unsettling truth about the woman who had once been with Sundari. The woman's name was Leah Winters, an environmental scientist whose disappearance had gone largely unnoticed in the global conversation about wildlife trafficking. She'd been studying endangered species, researching how poachers exploited the fragile ecosystems of India. And somewhere along the way, she had saved Sundari, but Sundari had returned the favor. She had saved Luma. And now, as the moonlight bathed the hospital in its quiet glow, it became clear that Luma wasn't just a girl in need of saving. She was the last link to a past that no one could fully understand yet, and the tiger, Sundari, wasn't just an animal, she was a guardian. She was a mother. And Luma's world had just been flipped upside down. 3 days passed. Luma woke slowly, her eyelids fluttering like the wings of a butterfly, testing the air for the first time. The sterile white room seemed strange to her eyes, too bright, too quiet. The faint smell of antiseptic and soft linen wrapped around her like an unfamiliar blanket. She blinked, trying to make sense of her surroundings, but her mind was hazy, like trying to remember a dream that was slipping away. The nurse, Joy, was sitting beside her, holding Luma's hand gently in her own. It was a gesture of kindness, but also one of uncertainty, as if Joy wasn't entirely sure what to say to the small, bruised girl in the bed. Luma's eyes flickered, confusion clouding her gaze for a moment, but then her lips parted, a faint whisper breaking the silence. "Where's Mama?" The word hung in the air. Joy's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't expected that question yet, hadn't known how to answer it. She shifted in her seat, brushing a strand of hair from Luma's forehead. "Your mama." "Sweetie? Do you remember what happened? Do you remember where she is?" Luma's eyes grew wide, as if the question stirred something deep within her. Her small face crumpled as memories fought their way to the surface, sharp and jagged. She fell." Her voice was broken, each word catching in her throat as she spoke. "Big rocks." I screamed. The room chilled, and for a moment, the stillness felt suffocating. Joy tried to keep her voice steady as she pressed a soft hand to Luma's. "Do you remember where it happened, Luma? Where did you fall?" Luma's eyes glazed over for a moment, a distant look in her face. Then, with a quiet, trembling voice, she added, "The forest. Mama said I couldn't go near the rocks, but I was scared. I wanted to find her." The words hit Joy like a wave. The forest. The rocks. It all began to paint a picture of isolation, of something far more sinister than anyone could have imagined. Joy felt the weight of the girl's past pressing down, like a shadow she couldn't shake before Joy could respond. A new voice interrupted the moment, a voice that had been soft but urgent, clear through the door. "Luma?" The girl's head turned instinctively toward the door, and in the quiet stillness, something in her expression shifted. There was a flicker of recognition, a spark of something that reached deep inside her. Luma's lips parted, and for the first time in days, a faint but genuine smile broke through the walls of her heart. "Sundari." Luma's voice was barely above a whisper, but it was enough. Enough to make the world stand still for a moment. The nurse and the doctor, who had entered behind Joy, exchanged a quick, concerned glance. Joy opened the door gently, and standing in the hallway was the tiger. Sundari's eyes met Luma's from across the room, and a deep, primal connection stirred in the air. The tiger's massive frame was silhouetted against the harsh hospital lighting, her golden eyes glowing in the dimness. But despite her imposing presence, there was something soft in the way she stood. Her body held low to the ground, her tail twitching in an almost anxious rhythm. Luma sat up in her bed, reaching out a hand, her heart beating faster. "Mama?" Sundari stepped forward, her movements slow but deliberate, each one filled with purpose. She moved across the room with a grace that belied her size, her soft padding soundless on the floor. She came to a halt beside the bed and, without a sound, lowered her massive head to Luma's level. The tiger's warm, moist breath brushed across Luma's face, and the girl's trembling hand found its place on the animal's fur. She pressed her palm into the tiger's soft, striped coat as if she had been waiting for this moment, waiting to find something. Familiar in the chaos, the room seemed to hold its breath. Even the nurses and doctors standing at the edges of the room could do nothing but watch. There was a bond between the girl and the tiger that transcended all logic, all sense of reason. It was something elemental, something ancient. Luma's voice broke the silence again, softer now, a quiet murmur to the tiger's fur. "I miss Mama." The words hung in the air for a long time, but no one dared to answer. Instead, Sundari made a low, rumbling sound in her throat. It wasn't a growl, but something more mournful, more sorrowful, like a song of longing. She pressed her forehead into Luma's chest, her eyes closing for a moment, as if to say, "I'm here now," and for that brief moment, everything else seemed to disappear. There was no hospital, no doctors, no questions. There was only the girl, and the tiger, bound by love that was older than anything human could understand. Elsewhere, in the forest beyond the city, the search for answers continued. The police had expanded their efforts to search deeper into the forest, pushing farther away from the hospital as they followed the few scattered clues that might lead them to the truth about Luma's past. But it wasn't until they ventured nearly 15 miles into the thickest part of the woods that they uncovered something that shook them to their core. A cabin, small and dilapidated, stood almost hidden beneath the dense overgrowth of vines and moss. It looked as if it had been abandoned for years. There were no roads leading to it, nothing that marked its existence. But inside the cabin, they found signs of life. There were animal skins drying by the fire, old clothes scattered across the floor, and jars filled with berries and roots stacked neatly on shelves. It was a place that had been lived in, but by who? On the wall, they discovered a photo torn at the edges, but still recognizable. It was a woman holding a baby in her arms. And in the woman's other hand was a small tiger cub. The officer who found it froze. This is Leah Winters," he said, turning to the others. "But this doesn't make sense. Leah went missing years ago. She was studying wildlife. Trafficking in India. No one knew what happened to her." The officers continued to search, slowly uncovering more details. A journal, its pages yellowed with age, was found wedged beneath a loose floorboard. The handwriting, although shaky in places, was clear enough. "Luma calls her Mama. She doesn't know she's not human." I think the tiger knows she isn't either. We three are all we have left." The words sent a shiver through the officers. They now understood Luma wasn't just a girl who had been abandoned. She had been raised in the wild, hidden away with a woman and a tiger who had become family in a way the world didn't understand. And somewhere in that dense forest, the bond between Luma and Sundari had been forged, one that had survived. The harshest of trials docked back at the hospital. Luma slept soundly for the first time in days. She clutched onto the tiger's fur, her hand wrapped tight in the striped pelt as if it were a lifeline. And Sundari, though restless, stayed close by. Her side, her body curled protectively around the bed. Her golden eyes never strayed far from the girl Dot in the quiet. As the moonlight poured through the window, it became clear that the bond between Luma and Sundari was far beyond what anyone could comprehend. It wasn't just love, it was something, older something that had existed long before civilization, long before people could name it. It was a connection that could never be broken. Dot, and in the darkness, the forest, the wild spoke through them both. Sundari's cries filled the night air, raw and deep, the sound of a grieving mother desperate to hold her child. It was the kind of grief that cut through the bones, something primal and heartbreaking. But it was also the sound of lost one that no human ear could truly comprehend. The tiger had been tranquilized. A soft dart injected into her flank as Dr. Elena Ramirez and a team of wildlife experts carefully handled the situation. No one wanted to hurt her, but they also knew that Sundari was no longer safe on hospital grounds. They had tried to reason with her, tried to understand the bond between her and Luma, but it was clear that the tiger was not about to let go of the girl without a fight. Luma, of course, had seen it all. She had been awake for days, watching. From her bed, as the staff moved in and out of her room, talking in hushed tones about what to do with the tiger. It had started as whispers behind closed doors, but now the discussions were louder, more urgent. The tiger wasn't just an animal, it was a dangerous animal. The word echoed through the hospital like an accusation. Dangerous. It had started when Sundari had refused to leave the parking garage. The animal control experts, backed by local authorities, had come up with a plan to sedate her temporarily, they assured Luma, but Luma knew. Luma knew what it meant when they spoke of sedatives. The calm that had come over Sundari's massive form was fleeting, but the tension in the air was thick and suffocating. Luma had begged them. She had whispered to Dr. Ramirez and Nurse Joy, her voice so small it seemed as though it might break in two. Please, don't hurt her, don't take her away. But the adults, their faces grave with concern, had no answer. They didn't understand. They couldn't understand. The tiger was sedated at last, but her heart had not quieted. She lay sprawled across the concrete floor of the hospital's transport unit, still breathing heavily as the tranquilizers began to work their way through her bloodstream. Her body was too large, too wild to be held in the cold, concrete cage of the unit they had prepared for her. Sundari's wildness was tethered now, but her spirit had not been subdued. Luma had watched it all, her hands trembling at her sides. As she stood at the window, unable to tear her gaze away from the sight of her protector, the one who had carried her and loved her without question. It was in that moment that Luma realized something. She wasn't just losing a friend, a companion. She was losing her mother. Dr. Ramirez entered the room with a soft knock, her expression gentle. Luma, we have to let Sundari rest. She needs to be in a place where she can be safe. The tranquilizers will wear off soon, and we're sending her to a sanctuary, a special place for animals like her. Luma's eyes locked with the doctor's, her brow furrowing in a way that made Dr. Ramirez feel like the ground beneath her feet might crack open. The child's face was streaked with silent tears, but Luma wasn't crying, not really. She was staring at Dr. Ramirez with the kind of intensity that only a child who had seen too much could possess. No, Luma whispered. No, you can't. You can't take her. Dr. Ramirez knelt down beside the bed, her voice soft but firm. Luma, we need to keep you safe too. We can't just leave you here alone. We'll figure out a way for you to see Sundari, but right now, we need to make sure she's safe. We'll take her to a place where she can be free. She'd be able to roam, to hunt, to live the way she should. Luma clenched her fists, biting back the words that surged through her chest, clawing at her throat. She wanted to scream, to shout that Sundari was more than an animal, more than just a wild thing. She was her mother. But instead she looked at Dr. Ramirez, eyes wide with a kind of broken pleading. You don't understand, Luma said softly. She died without me. She needs me. I need her. Dr. Ramirez's heart ached as she searched. The girl's face, her expression a mixture of sorrow and confusion. She couldn't understand the depth of the bond between Luma and Sundari, not fully, but she could see the girl's pain. She could feel the quiet terror that hung in the air, thick and suffocating. By the time they reached the high-security wildlife facility, the air was thick with tension. Sundari had been sedated for the journey. Her massive form sprawled across the back of the transport van, a dozen professionals keeping watch over her every movement. There was a heightened sense of urgency, though no one would admit it aloud. Luma had refused to leave her side, not even for a moment. She insisted on riding in the van, her small body curled up next to Sundari's sleeping form. The staff tried to encourage her to sit apart from the tiger, but Luma wouldn't listen. She had to stay with her mother. She had to be with her. The facility loomed in the distance, a fortress of concrete and steel. Security cameras watched from every angle, and the air was colder here, far colder than Luma had anticipated. She could see the open spaces outside, but it wasn't the same. It wasn't the wild. And Sundari had been born in the wild. As the doors to the transport van opened and they began to lead Sundari into the facility, Luma's heart sank. Her pulse quickened, and before anyone could stop her, she broke free from the grip of the staff who had been holding her back. She ran toward Sundari, her legs still weak from days in bed, but her desperation gave her strength. she shouted, her voice a raw and powerful cry. "Mama, don't leave me!" The tiger, despite being sedated, reacted to Luma's cry. Her body jerked awake, her wild eyes snapping open, her head lifting to meet the girl's gaze. For a moment, everything stood still. The guards, the wildlife experts, the doctors, they all watched as Luma stood there, frozen in time, her hand outstretched toward the tiger. Sundari's body shook as the sedatives worked their way through her system. But the moment she saw Luma, the quiet, powerful bond that existed between them flared into life. Sundari opened her mouth, her lips pulling back as if to speak, but there was no sound. Instead, a low, sorrowful growl rumbled from her throat like a mother's heart breaking. "Please," Luma cried, her voice breaking as she reached for Sundari. "Please don't go. I can't live without you." Dr. Ramirez stepped forward, her voice firm but kind, trying to soothe Luma, but the girl shook her head violently. "She's not just an animal," Luma cried, her voice a mix of fury and grief. "She's my mother. You can't just take her away." The silence that followed was suffocating, and in that moment, Dr. Ramirez realized that this wasn't just a battle over the tiger's safety. It was a fight for something much deeper. Something far more fragile. It was a fight for love. 3 months had passed since Sundari was taken from Luma, and in that time, everything had changed. Luma had healed physically. Her bruises had faded. Her ribs had mended, and the pain in her leg was only a dull ache now. But emotionally, her heart was still a battlefield. Every day she woke to the same emptiness, the same hollow ache in her chest where Sundari had once been. At first, she had refused to leave her room, curling up in the corner with a sketchbook, filling its pages with pictures of tigers, great, majestic beasts with eyes full of love and sorrow. She drew Sundari again and again, the tiger standing guard over her. The tiger curled beside her in the forest, the tiger with a quiet understanding in her gaze, but after weeks of petitions, of letters and phone calls from activists, lawyers, and even celebrities, something had changed. It was like the world had reached out to Luma's side, extending an invisible hand and telling her that it wasn't over. The sanctuary had agreed to the compromise. Sundari would be allowed to live in the sanctuary, a protected, open-range reserve created specifically for animals who couldn't return to the wild. Luma could visit her as often as she liked under supervision, of course. The terms had been set. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't the wild. But it was something. Today, Luma would visit Sundari for the first time since they'd been separated. The sun hung low in the sky as the car carrying Luma pulled up to the entrance of Earthlight Sanctuary. It was vast rolling hills of green, vast stretches of open land where animals could roam free, and towering trees stretching toward the heavens. The scent of earth and grass filled the air, a distant memory of the forest where Luma had once lived with her mother, Leah, and Sundari. Luma stared out the window, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, the familiar weight of anxiety pressing down on her like a rock. She hadn't seen Sundari in months, and she had no idea how the tiger had adjusted to life here. Would Sundari remember her? Would she be angry? Would she even recognize her? Luma's thoughts were a mess of questions, each one more desperate than the last. She felt sick with anticipation, but there was also hope, a tiny flicker of it buried deep within her. She clung to that hope like a lifeline, afraid to let it go. Afraid that if she did, she would lose Sundari for good. The car slowed and the gates to the sanctuary opened. The moment the car came to a stop, Luma didn't wait for the door to be opened for her. She jumped out and rushed toward the entrance, her eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of Sundari. She had to see her. She had to know that she was okay. A figure appeared in the distance. It was a massive shape, her orange and black coat blending into the landscape. But there was no mistaking the way she moved. No mistaking the power and grace in each step. Luma's heart skipped a beat. It's her. She ran toward the tiger, her legs moving faster than they ever had before. She didn't care that the grass underfoot was wet, or that the path was uneven. She didn't care about anything except that Sundari was there. Sundari's head snapped up at the sound of footsteps, her large golden eyes widening as she saw Luma running toward her. The moment the tiger caught sight of the girl, something inside her seemed to snap. She surged forward, her body moving with the speed and precision of a wild animal, her powerful limbs eating up the distance between them. Luma stopped just a few feet away from the tiger, her breath coming in quick, shallow gasps. She held her hands out, palms facing the tiger's face. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "Mama." Sundari halted just in front of her, her massive head lowering to meet Luma's gaze. For a moment they simply stared at each other, their eyes locked in that unspoken understanding. The world around them seemed to fall away. There were no fences, no humans watching from the sidelines, no walls between them. There was only the two of them, bound by something deep and unbreakable. And then, as if on cue, Sundari's body trembled and a deep, low sound vibrated in her chest, a noise that was almost like a purr, but mixed with something more mournful. Something raw. Her enormous body leaned in, her forehead pressing gently against Luma's, and Luma collapsed into her, wrapping her arms around the tiger's neck. Tears flooded her eyes as she buried her face into Sundari's fur. "I missed you so much, Mama. I thought I lost you." Sundari made another low, rumbling sound, her body trembling as if she, too, had carried the weight of those months without Luma. She licked the girl's cheek gently with her rough tongue, her massive body nuzzling against Luma's like a mother trying to reassure her child that everything would be okay. The two of them stayed like that for a long time, their bond speaking louder than any words could. There was no need to explain the pain, no need for any promises. There was only the understanding that despite everything they had been through, despite the separations and the battles, they were still together. And that was enough. Eventually, Luma pulled away just enough to look up at Sundari. Her face was streaked with tears, but there was a smile on her lips, one that was full of relief, of love. "I still have you," Luma whispered, her voice trembling. "You're still my mama." Sundari made another soft sound, her eyes closing briefly, as if to say, "I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the fields. Volunteers and caretakers stood at a distance, their eyes watching the reunion, but no one dared approach. They understood. This was a moment between mother and daughter. Luma knew the world would continue to see Sundari as just an animal. But in her heart, Luma knew the truth. Sundari was more than that. She was the one who had protected her, who had kept her alive when no one else could. She was the mother who had taught Luma what love truly meant. As Luma stood there, wrapped in the warmth of Sundari's presence, she realized something that had been buried deep inside her heart for far too long. No matter what happened, no matter how much the world tried to separate them, this bond would never be broken. It wasn't a goodbye, not anymore. And there you have it, an unforgettable journey of love, survival, and the bond between a child and a tiger that defies the very laws of nature. But now, it's time for you to decide. Will this story of hope and heartbreak find its rightful place in the hands of someone who can truly appreciate its power? This is your chance. The auction is closing soon, and the final bid could mean more than just a new owner for this story. It means preserving the legacy of a love that transcends species, the hope of a child who refused to be alone, and the powerful message that family isn't always about blood, it's about the heart. So don't wait. Place your bid now, and make sure that this incredible tale of resilience, connection, and wild beauty can inspire the world for years to come.